Good evening and thank you for joining me on Black News Tonight. I'm Marc Lamont Hill. Topping our news tonight, charges have been filed against 3 Pennsylvania officers in the death of Fanta Bellitti. The 8-year-old girl was shot and killed while leaving a high school football game back in August. A dispute between 2 teens led to them firing guns. The 3 officers shot at a moving vehicle, hitting 4 people, including Fanta. Officers Devon Smith, Sean Dolan, and Brian Devaney are all facing 1 count of voluntary manslaughter, 1 count of involuntary manslaughter, and 10 counts of reckless endangerment. Each officer has a bail set of $500,000. A preliminary hearing is set for January 27th. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is backing a bill that would prohibit public schools and private businesses from making white people feel uncomfortable. The bill, called Individual Freedom, takes aim at critical race theory. The Senate Education Committee has already approved it. Most Republicans are in favor of it, while Democrats feel it isn't necessary. Democrats further argue that it could lead to lawsuits and censorship in schools. DeSantis held a press conference last month calling critical race theory crap and vowed to pass a bill allowing people to sue if they see it being used. In addition to free COVID tests, the White House is also giving out free N95 masks. White House officials are announcing, in fact, they've announced a new program set to get high-quality masks to those who need them by next month. They're hoping to give out 400 million masks by working with pharmacies and community health centers across the country. At this time, a limit to how many masks will be given per person, it's not quite clear. An outpouring of condolences tonight at the passing of groundbreaking fashion journalist André Leon Talley. The former editor-at-large of Vogue died on Tuesday at the age of 73. In life, Talley held a towering influence over the fashion world. He stood 6'7" tall, and he often adorned the most spectacular of robes. He was a fearless advocate for diversity, not just on the runway, but also off of it. When asked where his fantastic sense of style all began, the iconic author, critic, and one-time fashion advisor to the Obamas would mention his upbringing in Jim Crow-era North Carolina and the grandmother who raised him.
Everything in our house was washed and everything was ironed. My grandmother used to iron her sheets, and they were Egyptian cotton. And she used to iron my underwear, and she ironed the towels. And she loved cleanliness.
The person who conducted the interview you just saw is a fashion world legend in her own right. She's also my guest right here on Black News Tonight. Robin Givhan is a Pulitzer Prize-winning writer and a senior critic at large. She joins us now to talk about the incredible life and legacy of André Leon Talley. Robin, always good to see you. Welcome back to B&T.
Thank you.
You wrote an incredible tribute to André in the Washington Post. In it, you say that he had to bend the fashion industry to his will. I love that idea. What was the fashion world like when he arrived in New York in the 70s, and how did he change it?
Well, I mean, it was very different from what it is today. It was a much more sort of rarefied, very clubby kind of community. Many of the brands, particularly the large European brands, were really sort of family-owned businesses. They were not these sort of international companies that had to respond to stockholders. And so what he found was an industry dominated by aristocrats and white socialites, limousine liberals, and quite frankly, a lot of snobs. And he arrived with an incredible amount of knowledge. He had a degree in French history and literature, a master's from Brown University, and he was absolutely prepared for the fashion industry. He had a work ethic that he had learned from his grandmother, and he also had a deep faith that he had also gotten from his grandmother.
That faith animated so much of what he did in the world, both in terms of his interpersonal relationships, how much of a mentor he was to so many people, how many doors he attempted to not just open for himself, but to leave open for people who came behind him. But we also don't want to ignore his, quite frankly, majestic accomplishments. How the name André became synonymous with fashion. Can you talk to people about the examples? I think some people might not appreciate just how influential he was on the culture.
Well, I mean, first of all, he was the creative director of American Vogue, and he held that title at a time, before the dawn of, digital publications, and American Vogue was really the fashion Bible. It had an enormous amount of clout. And he was the person who sat alongside its editor-in-chief, Anna Wintour, at fashion shows. And, together they, sort of determined which designers rose and fell, which trends saw the light of day. They determined who was going to be on the cover of a magazine, who was going to be elevated, how our culture defined beauty. And the ways in which that we define beauty has an enormous impact on who we value, who we elevate, who we believe is worthy. So the fact that he was in the room when those kinds of decisions were being made had a tremendous impact on the culture. And I would point out that one of his most memorable fashion shoots, which actually wasn't for Vogue, but was for Vanity Fair, sort of reframed the old Gone with the Wind story with Naomi Campbell in the starring role of Scarlett O'Hara. So he really thought about the role that fashion played in telling stories, and how fashion needed to tell everyone's story, and how deeply fashion could reflect both contemporary times, but how it also could reflect history, and how it could change our understanding of history.
As we saw in the clip about his grandmother, Andre also never forgot his roots. You can't talk about him without talking about the South. What impact did the South have on his work?
Well, I think that clip is a really great example of the way that he, just sort of understood how there were so many men and women of his grandmother's generation who had a tremendous amount of intelligence and ambition, but circumstances didn't allow them to take that ambition and build on it. But what they did have, and they did build on, was their dignity, and they built up the church, and they used the church as a centerpiece, for their community and for their activism. And he really, I think, took the example of his grandmother and the way that she would prepare herself for Sunday service, the way that she held it in such regard, and the way that she also held herself in great regard. This was a woman who spent her week cleaning for other people, but she never neglected her own home. She gave it as much care, if not more, than she gave the homes of other people. And she made sure that she was as elegant as, the owners of the homes where she worked. And I think it's no surprise that Andre took that example. And when he, sort of adorned himself for his public outings, he did it in a way in which, he strode through life like a king.
It's so true. Before we go, I want to talk about Andre and how he mentored others and worked to promote diversity in the fashion industry throughout his career. As I said before, he kept the door open after he got in to make sure others got in too.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that happened after that interview, which was live, and the audience afterwards immediately came up and wanted to engage him. And one of the things that I thought was quite striking was that he said no to selfies. He didn't want to just have some, 10-second exchange for an Instagram post, but he would spend as long as it took to answer questions. He really engaged with people, especially students, especially aspiring designers. And he never sugarcoated the demands of the industry. He was always very focused on encouraging people to be prepared, to be educated, to know what they were talking about, to not get distracted by this idea of a glamorous, globe-trotting existence in fashion, but to understand that it was a business, that it was an art form in his estimation, and that it had an enormous potential to alter the way that the culture felt about people, different kinds of people. And I would also add that, he made a point of attending the shows of up-and-coming designers. And if he liked a designer, he was very vocal about it. He was ebullient about it. He would automatically tell as many people as he could corral and say, you've got to go and see this person. You've got to go to the showroom. Did you miss the show? You've got to go and, to the showroom and see it. It's amazing. It's tremendous. If he was excited about something, he did not contain it. He absolutely shared it with everyone.
Robin, stick around with me. I want to talk more André Leon Talley when we come back, because this is such a towering figure. We absolutely want to make sure we do his life and his legacy justice. Everybody stay right here. More Black News Tonight coming up. Welcome back to Black News Tonight. Robin Givhan is a Pulitzer Prize-winning writer, and she's a senior critic at large, who joins us now to speak on the incredible life and legacy of André Leon Talley. Robin, as we were saying, there is a huge impact and a huge imprint that he's had on fashion. But the other piece of this, I think, is that he was a very publicly sort of proud and out Black man. I mean, he at a moment where people were in closets, he was very clear to say, look, I am not heterosexual. He was clear to try to make an example, not to be on a soapbox, but to not hide from his identities, to not perform masculinity in traditional ways. It was very clear that he wanted to be dope and fabulous and all the things that he wanted to be on camera and on photo, and that was fine.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I always sort of found fascinating about André was that he was 100% himself on the public stage, while at the same time maintaining an element of privacy. His private life was private, but he brought his entire identity to whatever event or in whatever public space he happened to be in. I mean, later in life, he certainly became known for these grand caftans and robes and slippers and crowns and sweeping fur coats and all of that. But early on, when he was younger, and he was a bit of a rail when he was much younger, he was also very much in love with beautifully tailored suits and silk shirts, and had a real sense of sort of a dandyish style. So his style did evolve over time, but it was always very much rooted in this sense of personal confidence, but also this belief that in many ways our identity is inextricably entwined with our attire.
That is absolutely true. And that shift is sort of interesting to me when I look at the old black and white photos, like you said, of him with these amazing, impeccably tailored suits. And then the style toward the end was a powerful shift, and one that absolutely was a marker of just how much he wanted to be. He was willing to be himself in a world that doesn't always reward that, especially for Black men. What do you hope the world will remember most about André Leon Talley as a person and as a trailblazer in fashion?
Well, I mean, I think it's wonderful that people do remember sort of the style statement that he made, in the pages of magazines and in his guest appearances on television shows and in movies. But ultimately, I hope that they remember that this was a person of incredible intelligence, that this was someone who really brought a multi-layered approach to fashion that included the Western tradition, the European tradition, but also the Southern Black tradition and the contemporary pop culture street sensibility as well. He saw the power and the relevance and the beauty in all of that. And I hope they also remember that this was someone who had an incredible sense of generosity and who reveled in other people's success as much as he enjoyed his own.
Are there any people out there now who you think are kind of heirs to his legacy, people who have taken on the fashion world in ways that either reflect what he put out in the world, or kind of took the baton and moved it forward?
Well, I think the most obvious contemporary or someone who follows in his wake is Edward Enninful, who is the editor-in-chief of British Vogue. And he's done a tremendous job in bringing inclusivity to that publication. When he first took the helm, one of the things that he was very clear about was his desire to make it a more diverse publication. And he, is the first Black person to be editor-in-chief, also the first Black man, or the first man, I should say. And it is an extraordinary thing that he's done with the publication, because he has maintained the sense of fantasy and exuberance and aspirational tone of the magazine, but he simply, allowed other people to come in and to participate in that dream. And the current issue of the magazine, in fact, features all of these beautiful Black African models who are now experiencing quite success in the industry. And it's an extraordinary cover to see something like a dozen of these Black women photographed in extraordinary fashion, in glamorous ways, and with a real loving eye.
Wow, a loving eye. I like that expression, because so often Black people, Black fashion, Black bodies don't get looked at with a loving eye. In fact, it's hard sometimes to even recognize our humanity when we look through the lens of the other. And so someone like André is so important to me, because he was always, no matter how ensconced he was in European fashion and European tradition, no matter how well he spoke French, no matter how traveled he was undeniably Black, undeniably Southern, undeniably himself, and he made the world accept us on his terms and not the opposite. And that is why, for me, he's an absolute legend.